Welcome to our session, everyone, from wherever you are in this country. Welcome. This session is called Ask Me Anything, Research by the North, for the North, in the North. We will be welcoming questions from the audience and at the end of this panel and invite you to use the Q&A feature to submit your questions. I have some verse to share with you here. The Arctic region is undergoing unprecedented changes from modernization, industrialization, and rapidly warming climate. Air temperatures in the Arctic continues to warm at over twice the rate of the rest of the world. Understanding and adapting to these rapid changes, it requires innovative, inclusive, and collaborative research, including from those most connected to and impacted by these rapid changes. Arctic research is leading the way on Indigenous-led research, based on questions prioritized by Northerners to meet their needs. Indigenous peoples living in the Arctic have been generating knowledge and developing expertise about their environments since time immemorial. And new Arctic research funding programs are providing innovative opportunities to support and fund this critical research. With a history of collaboration and collaborative research and knowledge sharing, the North provides rich opportunities for advancing and promoting knowledge, co-production, and can serve as an example of this research approach. Funding Indigenous-led research strengthens self-determination, builds research capacity, and produces better research outcomes. Today, we will hear from a panel of experts from across Canada and across the Canadian Arctic who are all involved in Indigenous-led Arctic research, including Indigenous research leaders carrying out research projects in their communities. So welcome. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Bantad Guchin, people of the lakes. My Guchin name is Kwahatlakti, one who gives away their last cup of tea. And I'm also co-research director of the Canadian Mountain Network, an adjunct professor at the Faculty of Science at McGill University, and senior advisor. I am pleased to be your moderator. I'm a senior advisor as well with the Indigenous Leadership Initiative, and I'm pleased to be your moderator this evening. I was raised and educated in Old Crow Flats in Vantut, where are thousands of lakes, and I'm a citizen of Vantut Guchin First Nations, people of the lakes, and I'm also a member of the Wolf Clan. So with me this evening, I have Arctic experts from across the country. Charlie will show the slide at this point, as you can see there on your screen. Shirley Tagelik, director of Kumik-Kavavik Society and the Nunavut Network Environment and Indigenous Health Research in Arviat, Nunavut. Kukik Baker is the executive director of Kumik-Kavavik Society, from Arviat, Nunavut, and Nicole Redverse is a co-founder and current board chair of the Canadian charity of the Arctic Indigenous Wellness Foundation based in Yellowknife, Northwest Territories, and is a member of the Deninu-Q First Nation in Denendeh. Murray Humphreys is an associate professor of McGill Northern Research Chair, Director, and co-research director of the Canadian Mountain Network and joins us from Montreal, Quebec. Andrew Arik is the regional operations lead of Smart Ice for the Kiktamalik region. So we will start with these questions. The first question is, what does Indigenous-led research look like in your community and in your work? So this question is for all panelists. So on my screen, I have first up Murray Humphreys, and it all moved around. So the first up on my screen is Shirley Tagelik and Kukik Baker.
Thank you for that, Norma, and thanks to CSPC for the opportunity to talk about our research. Akiyamavik Society is a community-driven research association. We're part of a CIHR funded NEAR site. And the focus of a lot of our research is on documenting Inuit Kayumayaktukangid, or Inuit ways of knowing. And so in that work, we have developed an Ayikatiginak research methodology that we promote in all the work that we do. We also are doing a lot of research and have been doing a lot of research since 2012 in the area of food sovereignty and climate change monitoring and mitigation. And I'll let Kukik speak briefly to some of the work that's being done at Akimavik around climate change research.
So in 2012, we started the Young Hunters program. And so it's a program where we take youth out on the land and they're learning traditional hunting skills, sustainable hunting practices, the values and beliefs around respectful, just being respectful living. And so with that, we started looking at like the climate change and how we as Inuit can adapt to the climate around us, and looking at the health of the animals that we're seeing when we're taking the youth out on the land. And so we started off doing like necropsies with the kids, and now we're looking at weather monitoring. We're looking at the health population of caribou, seals, beluga whales, polar bears in our area. And we're also doing smart ice. So we're looking at the ice that's typically used around Akbayat, looking at the thickness, the density, and we're also doing in the summer marine mapping because our seabed is rising, and so people are hitting their boat motors on rocks and stuff that weren't there before, and so we wanted to get new accurate maps for our community so that people hopefully will save somebody a $6,000 motor.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Nicole Redvers.
Thank you. Thanks, Norma, and happy to be here to talk a little bit about our work within the Arctic Indigenous Wellness Foundation. Our organization has primarily focused on revitalizing and reconnecting traditional healing services within our community. However, over the years, we saw an increasing need to be able to collect the important narratives that was the importance of land as a part of our healing. And because the land has been so affected by some of the changes that we see as a part of climate change, we felt and our elders wanted to be able to connect those two pieces together. One of the challenges that we've found in the process of thinking about research is due to the sacred nature of some of our knowledges, as well as some of our protocols that many, including myself, do not feel are I guess, okay to be put into scientific journals or those types of things. So we've developed very creative ways to think about utilizing our own Indigenous research methodologies and our own Indigenous evaluation processes to be able to collect stories that are focused on outcomes as opposed to the actual things that are done as a part of the process. because by being able to think about the outcomes or the endpoints, we can see the changes that happen as a part of the programs that we run without having to sacrifice some of the sacredness that is involved with some of our traditional protocols to outside communities and circles where, many feel that that knowledge shouldn't sit because it's, a part of our oral communication processes and also is very much based on certain methods and ways that we need to respect as a part of that work. So in terms of what research looks like within our organization, it's very much Indigenous led, it's very much Indigenous rooted. We try not to indigenize any Western processes. We really try to foundation our work within an Indigenous worldview and figure out how to adapt Western ways to that, so that the central focus is in and of itself rooted within our communities without any those stories and narratives to our process. So with that, I'm excited to say that we've seen good movement in that regard, and we've been able to successfully publish on some of our work, ensuring that our elders and community members are a part of the process every step of the way.
I see Nicole. Murray.
Thanks, Norma, for the opportunity, and just would like to acknowledge I'm connecting today from Montreal, traditional territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka, and that I'm a non-Indigenous settler, and so I'm kind of participating in this panel, speaking from a perspective as a scientist and researcher interested in supporting the connection of academic research with community-led and Indigenous-led research. So I'll answer this question kind of on behalf of the Canadian Mountain Network, which I'm honored to serve alongside Norma Cassie as co-research director, and how we see Indigenous-led research at our network. And so just a little bit about CMN. It's a network of centers dedicated to the for mountain landscapes, and we as a network are supported on holistic approaches based on both Indigenous and Western ways of knowing, and we want to seek to build partnerships between Indigenous organizations and communities, universities, governments, businesses, and then not-for-profit sector to advance knowledge production that is inclusive. And so CMN has a commitment, for specific amounts of funding, including at least 50% of funding in our last call for proposals for knowledge hubs that is Indigenous led. And from the network's perspective, Indigenous led research is research that is based on Indigenous ways of knowing and doing. And some of the criteria that we use to assess Indigenous led research is research that clearly responds to identified Indigenous community needs and research priorities, with the funding administered by Indigenous organizations or Indigenous knowledge leaders positioned at post-secondary institutions, research that's led by individuals that self-identify as Indigenous, and research that receives formal and detailed support from Indigenous community leadership, and research that prioritizes community engagement and capacity building, including Indigenous trainee development. So, lots of criterias, and I think the take-home messages are, respecting Indigenous leadership in formalizing research and envisioning, prioritizing what needs to be done, the ways it needs to be done well, and the outcomes of those research. Certainly as a network, we seek to support the combination of Indigenous-led research with other ways of knowing, and we've spent some time kind of trying to articulate models of ethical space and collaborative principles that can help those knowledge systems come together in an equitable and a synergistic way. So I think I'll end my answer at that for now.
Thank you, Murray. Andrew.
Koyanami, for having me with the panel. Andrew Ale, Smart Ice Nunavut Operations Lead for Qikiqtarjuq North. For community research, I would be looking at being led by the indigenous people and also being governed by the locals, because the locals are the community and they are the ones that know the area the best and well. And for my work that I do, we have a committee who are from the community and grew up from the community, and they have all these knowledge that they can pass on, and they drive me on of what type of research I should be focusing on within the community. So I agree with everyone. It should be led by indigenous people and also governed by local people. Have a committee. For Smart Ice and Pond Inlet, I have a committee from the Hunters and Trappers Organization, Hamlet Municipality, Search and Rescue. We include elders and youth, and they drive me on what I should focus on research aspect in my community. Clear to me.
Thank you. Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about what Smart Ice, just a little bit?
What Smart Ice is? Smart Ice started off as a pilot project here in Pond Inlet, Nunavut, and also in Maine, Labrador. And this was 7 years ago. And the ice conditions were becoming unpredictable to travel on. And the ice was forming a little later and breaking off a little earlier each year. And the knowledge is still there, but conditions are becoming unpredictable, and what Smart Ice is able to provide is real-time sea ice conditions for the locals to know what changes are occurring in real time.
Thank you. The next question we have for you, the panelists, are: how have perspectives and approaches to Indigenous-led research in the North changed over the past 10 years? And this question is for Murray, Shirley, and Cookie. So.
Sure, I'll have a first go at it and then pass it to Shirley and Kukik. I think that was interested in the 10-year time frame of that question, and it caused me a bit of a dilemma as to how to answer it. I think on one hand, I'd like to say a lot, and on another hand, not enough. And on the other hand, I'd like to acknowledge that some of the ways that we've been speaking about research being done by the North for the North has been achieved by some communities and some researchers for a very, very long time. So it's trying to navigate all that in the answer. But I think one of the things that would influence the way I answer the question is just thinking about the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, which was way back in 1996, and described, points like research that has Aboriginal experience. Use the word Aboriginal, we could use the word Indigenous, as its subject matter must reflect these perspectives and understandings, and that in the past, research concerning Indigenous peoples has usually been initiated outside the Indigenous community and carried out by non-Indigenous personnel. And Indigenous people have had almost no opportunity to correct misinformation or to challenge ethnocentric and racist interpretations. I still feel like that is in many cases the case, and it persists to this day. So I think on one hand, it's come a long way. The National Inuit Strategy on Research, lots of things have changed and advanced and moved things along. And I think that the youngest generation of researchers and scientists, university trained scientists, which I can speak on, with more experience and direct exposure, are more open, they prioritize community engagement and leadership at every stage of the research process, I think more successfully than many researchers in the past have done. But I still think there's major challenges about how research is supported, funded, prioritized, evaluated in Canada, that it are kind of structural barriers to change. And I know that many people are doing lots of work to chip away at those changes, but I think my short answer to that is it has changed. It is going in a better direction, but it hasn't changed enough, and there's still a lot of work to be done.
Shirley?
Yeah, I agree with you, Murray. Definitely, there's still a lot of work to be done, but I think some of the most significant changes have just been what Western research recognizing Indigenous research, that you know, for Inuit, research is part of life. It's always going on. Being on the land, being observant of climate changes, understanding why animal migrations are altering from season to season, living living in close relationship with the environment requires that you are continually doing research, you're continually doing science. You are continually building knowledge and making meaning of what's happening. And so Indigenous communities recognize this process as ongoing and required in order to live well in your communities. But it's only recently that the Western researchers have begun to recognize the depth of the research that has been taking place, and to now begin to give credence to those systems that have always been in place, and to you know, one of the important things is now that they are funding community-driven research, whereas in the past, 10 years ago, we couldn't get any funding unless we were affiliated with a university or a recognized research institution. So I think that's one of the significant changes. Our own research methodologies are also being recognized, and we're asserting them. You know, we don't want to do research using somebody else's methodology. We have methodologies that work for our communities, have worked over generations for our communities, and are in every way as effective and as grounded in methodological knowledge as any other methodology. And so we need those recognized, we need to be asserting those, and we need to be showing how those impact more effectively in our communities than you know, another methodology that is tried and true in research practice. And so I think one of the other big changes is that communities themselves have stood up and are being much more assertive in terms of how research is done, not to us, but by us, and that we are gaining ground in terms of what we do. One of the critical pieces for Inuit is that knowledge can only be defined as knowledge if it results in action, and the action must improve the lives of people on the ground. And so one of the things that Akimavik has been able to do is been able to insist that any research done in our community must result in this kind of action that improves the lives of people in our community. And I think that's one of the critical pieces that Kukik's work has been able to achieve, is that real research, real knowledge building leads to improvements that result in making our community a better place to live.
Mhm. Thank you, Shirley. Cookie?
Quite a few years ago, we were sitting and talking with one of the elders that we use in our Young Hunters program. And he was like, yeah, people had asked me, like Southern people had interviewed him on weather and climate change. And he kept telling them, yeah, it's because the earth has tilted on its axis. And they're like, well, how would you know that? And so he said, it's because the stars are not in the same place as they were when I was a kid. And he knew that the earth had shifted. And it was a few years later that a study came out and said the earth has shifted on its axis. So indigenous knowledge is like research, like Inuit are very aware of everything around them. And over the last few years, since colonization, our youth have lost that ability to be observant. And so one of the key things we do in our Young Hunters program is to teach them to be observant. So as the first session that they come to, they walk into our building, and the first question we ask them is, which way is the wind coming from? And every single time, every single one of them will say, I don't know. So we have to send them out and check and say, can you tell us where the wind's coming from? So they all go outside and check, and then they come back and they're all really happy and say, oh, it's coming from that way. But a lot of them won't know north, south, east, or west. They'll just say from like towards the airport or from the sea. Or so that's one thing that we're trying to teach in our program, especially with the youth, is to gain those skills back. Working with elders, learning the knowledge that the elders are able to share with them, and hopefully that's something that they can use later on in life.
Mhm. Thank you. Yeah, my elders kind of said the same thing about the movement of the earth too. Things are different, it moved. Yeah. The next question we have here is, how do local priorities and questions from northern communities guide your research? What impact does this approach have in your community, and what can we learn from this approach? And the question is for Andrew and Nicole. Andrew, you want to go ahead, or?
Yeah, sure. I like to see more Inuit-led research projects in the community. Like, for example, Iqaluit, which is a Barriers to Bridges program. And this program prioritizes research questions and having involvement within the community, making the community make decisions on research. I think that it should be more of a thing that should be going on up in the north.
So how could that be, Andrew? How would you like to see more research? Are you talking that there's not enough funding? Is there, you need more resources? How would you like to see that happen?
Well, you can't just barge into a community and tell the community that you need this research. You have to visit the community, ask the community organizations what research priorities that they think that will be important for the community. So that way, when having that relationship with the community will be a better outcome with the research.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Andrew. Nicole?
Thanks. I think one of the most fundamental pieces when it comes to thinking about research questions that are derived directly from community is the importance of worldview and how we think about our place in the world, and also our method of knowing and how we apply knowledge also. And if your worldview is very much rooted within Indigenous communities and contexts, that fuels the types and the perspectives and the way that you think about research questions. So automatically the research question becomes an extension of the story of the community. And if the research questions are coming from a completely different worldview that doesn't understand those interconnected pieces with land and animals and people and stars and all of those things, then you end up having a question that's completely disconnected from what the community is, what the community needs, and ultimately what actions come from, that research. So I don't think we give enough credence on it, why it's so important for the actual questions to come from community because of that reason, given the extension of the question from the community to the potential solution or the action that I think Shirley was talking about before. So, when a researcher comes in, it's very difficult the way that universities and institutions are set up, because it's very much looked at as an individual pursuit, where a researcher is creating their agenda or their portfolio or their expertise area. We train students in that way, that they have to focus on a certain component of something, as opposed to being able to develop skills to engage and be able to facilitate a process of questions that derive directly from those communities. So we see our work very much rooted in what I like to call deep listening, which is just listening to communities. And an elder always says we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. And I think we don't do enough of that as a part of the research process, is just listening to the stories, listening to the questions that come up, listen to the concerns that come up. And I think that's why we've been so successful in terms of our work, is because we're not creating the narrative, we're not creating the questions. Those are coming from community members directly. And because of that, they feel empowered in the process, because they're the ones that have control, but also leadership in how they see things moving forward. And, I see somebody like myself, even though I'm within the community, like a little worker bee, just trying to organize and facilitate as much as possible the community finding the answers to their own questions, that they want to ask. So, I reflect on that when I think about the question that you noted about research questions.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Could I add something?
Sure. Go ahead, Andrew.
If there's any researchers that are watching right now, I would suggest to add a couple more days to your itinerary to stay in the community and try and build that relationship within the community. And that's very important. And if you happen to get stuck because of weather, take that advantage and go around the community and see if something good might come out of it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you,
Thank
Andrew.
you.
Yeah, that's a long time concern that we always had in the North with researchers. I just want to talk about one little example. In my community, I'm Bantatwichin people of the lakes, like lots of lakes, right? And these lakes are draining. Permafrost is melting, they're draining really fast. And the scientists are researching them all the time up there, and they reported to the community that another big lake is going to go soon. And it was very sad. And then my brother and his friend go out and they check on skidoos every time they could. They go out on the land and they check those lakes. And for 2 years, they never saw beavers where they were all the time. And they go by those beaver places and they say, where are the beavers? So they went to look for them. This past year, and they found them. Those beavers were trying to stop that one big lake from draining. They had built houses along there or dams around there to try and stop it. Like, and they've been monitoring those beavers for years, like my brother since he was a child. So that's just to show like how much we monitor our own places, like you guys are saying. The next question is, if one example of a tangible benefit or impact from Indigenous-led research is in health and wellness, how does Indigenous-led research shape health and wellness research? And what impacts have you seen in your community? And then the other follow-up question is, how do you incorporate Indigenous-led research in studying health and wellness? And what lessons have you learned in this process? And this is for Shirley and Cookie and Nicole.
So I can start, but before I do, I'd like to add to what Andrew was saying about inviting researchers to spend more time in our communities. At Akimavik, if someone wants to do research with us, they have to come to the community in order to work with us to develop the research question. We're not going to work on your research question. We have to collaboratively develop a research question together. And so it has to meet our needs first. And the other thing is that when you come, we insist that you do a workshop with us to improve your understanding of Inuit Kayumayaktukangit, our way, Inuit ways of being. So anybody wanting to do research with us must learn from us about Inuit Kayumayaktukangit ways of doing research, so that you can work respectfully in our communities with us. But in terms of the question of health and wellness, it's kind of interesting because from an Indigenous perspective, and especially, according to Inuit Kayumayaktukangit, everything is holistic. So this idea of, oh, we're going to do research in beluga health, or we're going to do research in, weather, water, and ice changes, is not part of a holistic concept. So when Kukik was designing the Young Hunters program, for example, we were looking at it initially as a response to food insecurity. But when we did our first kind of evaluation of the program, when we went back to both the participants and parents and community stakeholders who were involved in the program and asked them, what we wanted to find out, like how many rabbits had been consumed, how many rabbits made it onto the dinner table. And what parents told us was, my child is so happy now. He visits his grandfather and asks him questions about hunting. My child wants to go to school every day so he can participate in the program. What are some?
My son doesn't want to sit and play video games all day anymore. He wants to get up and be active. Like, it's totally different from what we were expecting the responses to be.
So we were getting mental health responses, and eventually our program became tagged as a suicide prevention program. So you can't cubbyhole Inuit Kayumayaktukangit. It's because it's holistic, every aspect of our health and well-being is part of everything that is done, every aspect of life. And so, our research has to encompass all of it. We cannot be cubbyholing research into one little area or another. And
when we were first trying to develop the curriculum for the Young Hunters program, we worked with a group of elders who work as IQ knowledge holders at the Department of Education. And so we're in the office that they work, it's cubicles, right? So they don't have a window. And in the corner of the building was one little like a meeting room. And so I met with one of the elders there in the meeting room, and he said, you know what? Just talking about the land makes you feel so happy. And while we were in that room, he goes, when everything's kind of quiet and I don't have things to do, I like to come in here and just look out the window, because it was a corner room, and you could see the land from because it was like a pond across the street, and so you could see out on the land. And he said, just being able to see the land makes you happy. Mm-hmm. And makes you think of all the fun times that you had on the land. And when your mind gets clouded and you're so stressed from the day, just being able to get out on the land, like it's not very far here from anywhere you are in town. You can go 5 minutes and you're on the land. And so he said, when you feel very down and everything seems kind of heavy, that you should always go out on the land, because when you go on the land and you smell the smells around you, you breathe the clean air, you can look as far as the eye can see, and it just totally uplifts you and makes you feel so much better. The things that were clouding your mind and bringing you down are kind of left at the town limits, and then as soon as you get out on the land, you feel like you can think clearly and you could process your thoughts better when you're on the land. And so he said, you know, the land is very healing, and it doesn't matter where you go. Sometimes you can even just in your head picture different places on the land, and it will help bring that smile back onto your face.
So we could build a research program around, parasites in caribou or whatever it is, but ultimately it's going to be about healing and well-being, because it takes place on the land, and therefore it's feeding all of us as we do this work.
Thank you, Shirley. Nicole?
Thanks. That was a wonderful description. I don't think I could make it better than what Shirley and Kukik just described as a part of that process. So, I'm thinking again about the institutional piece and how siloed we continue to be in our disciplines, whether or not somebody's a biologist or a chemist or, somebody that's working in the medical sciences or public health. But, what was just clearly depicted is the need within institutions to break down silos and barriers and start cross communication across disciplines, because that's how it works within our community. There's no, specialist here in the bugs and then specialists here, in the caribou, because the communities have knowledge of all of those things, as a part of their ways of being and knowing, because it's about survival and it's about relationship. And what wouldn't it be great to see the similar embodiment of that diverse knowledge base within institutions, because it would change and facilitate and encourage cross-disciplinary dialogues where different fields are speaking to each other, so that we learn from social sciences and from medicine and from all of these pieces, because that's what gives Indigenous traditional knowledges so much strength. It's holistic, it's conceptual, it's non-linear, it's dynamic. There's so many components that it's circular. There's all of these aspects that come together to make it whole. And as noted, it really is all within that realm of health and well-being. Now, speaking from the medical standpoint, because there are some realities on the ground. If you get in a car accident, there's a good chance you're probably going to go to the nursing station or to the hospital. So in thinking about health and wellness research from more of a medicalized standpoint, and how we think about incorporating Indigenous knowledge, I always like to switch the dialogue around and say, well, wait a sec, why aren't we creating Indigenous systems as noted and figuring out how to adapt Western systems to it, even in the context of medical and clinical delivery and care within our communities. There's some great organizations that are doing that work. And we haven't seen, as of yet, our northern governments prioritize Indigenous ways of knowing and healing in the medical field. And then adapting again those Western ways to it within the nursing stations, within the counseling clinics, within the hospitals. Yes, we have traditional foods, that are thankfully being brought in, but it's still ultimately a Western space where our people are having to go into. And perhaps research is a way to start opening that narrative and critiquing some of the ways that healthcare is delivered and rooted within Western contexts continually in our communities, despite Indigenous people making up the majority of the population. And then lastly, I think, one of our greatest needs is encouraging our young people to pursue health sciences, but also going into the medical field so that we can hopefully inspire them to come back to our communities to serve our own people, because they will have a true understanding of that community dynamic, and involving young people within those projects and giving them experience and involving youth as a part of those research really helps to build up their resumes so that they have better chances of applying to some of these programs if it is something that they want to do. So just wanted to add that, but again, I don't think I could have done it any better than what Shirley and Kukik talked about with that holistic realm when it comes to research, and how everything really comes back to health and well-being, no matter which way that you put it, if you're looking at it the right way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like it's very holistic, and as you all said, like it involves our mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual being all being on the land at one time, and then all the elements are involved: the earth, water, the fire, the air, all of that is involved in it's holistic. It's all about, it's in everything that we do and breathe. So yes, the next question is about education and training. So if another example of tangible benefits in education and training, what successes and challenges have you seen in training the next generation of Indigenous research leaders in the North? And the suggested panelists for this response would be Andrew, Joseph, and Marie. Oh, Joseph is not here, so we'll just, whoever wants to jump in place of Joseph, that'd be great.
I'll tackle this one. Well, I'm interested in CI safety travel. I wanted to share the communities in and share that with the next generation, so they too can travel safely on the ice. And also having the data stay in the community and having it available for the community to look at, or because we're researching within the community, I think it should be available for the community also. And learning new research / IQ skills. That's always, because we're learning every day. If we knew everything, I don't think this panel would be going on. But I always love learning new research skills, and also in skills out on the land, being out with an elder also. And also one of the challenges I've seen is facilitating meetings. Facilitating is I don't know, it's a it takes more than one person to facilitate a meeting. I'll tell you that, but it is a challenge also. But I wanted to add this at the last part. Inuit are more than capable of doing the research in their community. We just need a bit of a training and some time, but we are very capable of doing research up in the north. Clear to me.
Mhm. Thank you, Andrew. Who's next here? Go ahead,
Hey.
Murray.
Thanks, Norma. So many great comments and discussion that I'm going to try and address a couple of the comments that were made in answering this. And just again, from my perspective as a university-based, researcher teacher, I'll point out the obvious barrier to recruitment of Indigenous-led researchers within academia, which is the concentration of academic centers in the South and the distance from communities of those centers. The enormous barriers in how we approach knowledge and teaching and organization. I was just interested in an example. If a student from the North is interested in learning and studying and taking a program about the effects of contaminants or toxicants on food safety in their community, and they would like to take a university program that would help them understand that better. First year courses, physics, calculus, chemistry, biochemistry, biology. Second year courses, biology 2, chemistry 2, organic chemistry. This kind of funnel approach where the people and the application to the people and to the health come at the capstone course at the end of the program, not at the start of the program. We teach it exactly upside down, I think, than how should be approached from a more holistic approach that would be cater better to the learning styles and priorities of Indigenous youth and from communities, and just the need to be in Montreal and the need to commit to a 4-year program and all those barriers. And thank God for Northern institutions, for the colleges and the programs they offer that I think are such a better segue into training and opportunities for Northern youth. But I'll kind of flip the question to think about what are some of the barriers to doing research in a good way by graduate students, whether Indigenous or non-Indigenous, and are seeking to contribute to community-led research through the work they might do for their thesis. And just thinking about some of Shirley's comments about the need to spend time in the community, and Andrew's comments and Nicole's, and the need to prioritize community leadership in the research they do, and just how difficult that can be within kind of a standard university-based funded context. For example, often there's not a lot of research funding until a proposal is written and reviewed. And how do you do those effective time in community and really co-learning without any research funding before it? How do you, oftentimes research funding is oriented around the research and the data collection, but not the follow-up, coming back to the community and connecting and sharing the results. But I think that's so critical to that effective training of graduate students in research led by the North. And just a couple of examples that come to mind of how that potential barrier has been overcome, and related to Andrew's comment on spending a bit more time in town. And this was actually with Norma's community of Old Crow, and just an experience I had where when I first had the opportunity to start working with the Vuntut Gwich'in and Old Crow, and we were just coming to know the community and coming to develop relationship there, it was so expensive to stay in town. It was costly for every day. And that's a disincentive to spend long periods of time in town. But the community, through their generosity, and there was housing shortage and limitation, but provided access to the rectory. It happened to be vacant and available. And all of a sudden there was an opportunity for researchers to stay in town for days or weeks or months. And that completely changed the nature of the relationship between the researchers and the community, just from time spent in town. something, just having a place where people could stay for longer periods. And all of a sudden there was an opportunity to say, just spend some time there and see. So that was one. And the other was just a kind of an approach we developed. I was involved in a NSERC funded collaborative research and training environment program with a big northern focus. And we encouraged all the students, the graduate students involved in that program, to do internships with local organizations at the start of their thesis. Sometimes hard, you go to town and you want to introduce your research and your proposal, or what do you want to study? I don't know, what should I study? You want to let the community define the research, but yet you need some idea, we found an internship where you make an agreement with a local organization to do a project of interest to them that prioritizes their priorities, whether it's a literature review, a research report, database analysis, whatever the skill set the students might have. Spend a couple of months in the community doing that internship, and over time possibilities start to emerge, relationships start to develop, perspective. Oh, okay, all of a sudden it kind of comes. It takes the pressure off. What are we going to work on together? How do we co-develop this research? But in the context where you're, even before you start to ask, before you start to make a request of community, you're giving something, you're offering your skill sets to that. So it's just an approach of how to kind of rejig the relationship between graduate students and thesis progress. It takes time. Time to completion might be a little slower, but it's time well invested, because it kind of generates knowledge co-production right from the start.
Yes, thank you. It's interesting
Could I
too.
add something?
Yes, go ahead, Andrew.
That was great, Maria. I agree with you totally. And I wanted to say that one of the challenges that we face up in the north is training and education, and we have to travel south to get that training or education. And it'd be great to have the training or instructor or educator to come to the community. And I know some people are reluctant of traveling outside the community or going south for school, because at a certain time of year, there's certain type of harvests that are more preferred. So with that said, some people are reluctant of traveling south for training or education. So it would be beneficial to have the instructor or educator to come to the community and train the people, so that way we'll have a great relationship. That's one of the challenges that came into my mind when Mary was speaking.
Thank you.
And if I can just add to that, as a long-time Northern educator, one of the biggest frustrations in my experiences is the definition of what constitutes knowledge, exactly as you've just described, Andrew. I will use my daughter here as an example of a teenager who came to me and said, I hate biology. And I said, how can you hate biology? You live biology. You're on the land, you're harvesting caribou, you go out and find your way around, you butcher your caribou, you load your sled, you bring it back. This is all biology. And she said, Mom, biology is answering the 22 questions at the end of the chapter. This is the problem with the way we're educating children today. And we're not recognizing the knowledge that they have inherent in their lived experiences. This is not part of Inuit Kayumayak Tukangit. And we are not making room for giving recognition to the knowledge that is held in our communities, the knowledge that we think we have to do research to get new knowledge, but we're not looking at how we recognize the knowledge that is inherent in our communities. And that's a huge disservice that we do in the whole way we are doing research. I think the other issue, Andrew, that comes out of what you've just said is that when we have people who are trained, they then come back to our communities and want to work as professionals in our communities and encounter all kinds of institutionalized racism. So you may have gone out and been trained as a professional, but when you go into the workplace, because you're Indigenous, your qualifications are recognized as automatically less than the qualifications of somebody else. And that's a huge, huge deterrent to people going out to get the training. But also, in terms of research, it's that I'm the expert in the room. It's that lack of recognition for all the expertise that is in the room that we need to be confronting. To change this whole way of viewing knowledge, our way of viewing who holds the knowledge, who creates the knowledge, how we value that knowledge in our communities. So I'll just throw that into the conversation. Thanks.
Thank you, Shirley. Yes, that's awesome. So we'll keep going with the questions here. We're on question 6 now. So how do you engage Indigenous youth in your research? And why is it so important? What successes and challenges have you experienced in engaging youth? What have you learned from youth in your work? And that's for Shirley and Cookie.
So when I started out working, when I was 13, I started working at the drop-in center, the Catholic Mission Drop-in Center. And so we did youth programming there. And then my whole life I've been doing, through the drop-in center, we started a summer camp. And so we did summer camp. And then I did community wellness, where I did activities and stuff for youth, and then started the youth group. So over the last 20 something years, I've done youth programming. And to keep youth engaged, you have to make it really fun for them. When we take the kids out on the land to do, like Mom said, when I was in high school and I didn't like biology, we make it fun for the kids. So we're looking at, while they're butchering their caribou, we're looking at, okay, what's this then? And so we're talking about all the body parts. We're looking at to see if they have do they have clubfoot? Do they have parasites in the meat, or in their skins? What do warble flies look like? And so we're doing that with them. We're trying to keep them engaged. We're asking them questions and getting them to use their thinking skills. So we're encouraging them to continually deep think, not just things that yes or no questions. It's something that we ask them questions that they have to actually get their gears moving and try and figure things out, either as a group or on their own. Some of them are really good at it, and some of them it takes a while, but they get it. So just trying to keep things motivated, and the people that you have instructing the program or being part of the program is really key as well. So having the right people doing the work with you. In the summer when we're doing our marine mapping, it's kind of really dull work because they're in a boat driving 4 to 6 miles an hour in the boat, just following a grid, and it's very, very boring work. Like, it's very boring work. But to keep the kids engaged, my husband's a teacher, so he has the summers off, and so we get him to drive the boat, and he engages the kids. Like, we're not only driving back and forth looking at the monitor, we're looking at can you see if there's any fish down there? Keep a lookout for rocks, or trying to keep them active. Is it an I Spy game? It doesn't matter what they're doing. They're out there having fun while they're doing their research. You want to add anything?
Oh,
I think that, the one piece is that kids want to be engaged. They want to do this stuff. They want to participate. And they get very excited when they see their knowledge is applied in a way that other people are excited about. So, one of the best things about Smart Ice is putting those Smart Ice maps up on our Facebook page, and people, making comments about, oh, gee, I'm going to have to change the way I'm traveling. I can't take that route anymore. Or, so it's immediate feedback for kids that they are valued by the community because of the work that they're doing and because of the knowledge that they're contributing to help make their community a better place. That's a really critical piece. We call it pijitarang. You have to give back to your community. You have to use whatever skills, abilities, knowledge you have to make your community a better place. And when kids have the opportunity to do that, they really step up. That's what it's all about for them, is that opportunity to give back, to learn, and to serve others in those kinds of ways.
so any opportunity for our youth is very, very important, especially now in this time. Like you guys are saying, like under the Canadian Mountain Network, we created hubs with Indigenous and non-Indigenous scientists working together. And one of the strongest criteria is to ensure that youth are trained along the project. And then at the end, in this summer and then the summer after, we're going to be training 40 youth. That's in a collaboration with the Canadian Mountain Network and the Arctic Inspiration Prize. So they're going to learn how to do community-based research, as well as learn a whole bunch of other things. So we really try to always keep youth involved in all our research to ensure that the research is Indigenous led. They work with other researchers that they want to work with, and they need to, one of our criteria is youth, to make sure youth are part of that project. So yeah, thank you. And then the next question we have, number 7, how does Indigenous-led research in Canada's North impact biodiversity, environment, and climate change research? What outcomes does this approach have for Northern communities and for knowledge generated? And I just want to add here, in the recently COP25, 26, was it? There was a strong recommendation coming from many world leaders that Indigenous peoples are now to be in the forefront of working towards in the area of climate change. So I just wanted to add that. So how does Indigenous-led research in Canada's North impact our biodiversity, our environment, and climate change in research? So, So for Murray, Andrew, and then someone can replace Joseph.
Thanks. I'll just start with that answer. I think back to some things that Nicole was talking about, and Shirley and Kukik as well, is about I'm a wildlife biologist, and those questions, climate change, environmental change, biodiversity, those can be within the domain of natural sciences. And when those topics and those priorities are positioned under Indigenous leadership and supportive, that promote and elevate Indigenous ways of knowing, they quickly become non-natural science limited problems to problems about health and wellness and well-being. And they, immediately connect people to food and food to people and wellness. I think they draw, on one hand, they narrow the focus. I think some climate change research, we like to talk about projections in 2080, what the world's going to look like in this many years, and how many degrees Celsius change, and what kind of carbon the scenarios of greenhouse gas emissions might look like. And I think they narrow, on one hand, the conversation to the here and the now and the existing impacts and the crisis that communities see before their very eyes. But on the other hand, they extend out the conversation to the knowledge of elders and the people that came before them, and concerns over the youth and the future generations, unborn generations. So, but within a context of people and wellness and crisis. And I just, as a biologist, as a natural scientist, I've been trained to study biological systems and environment as somehow separate from people. But when I hear Norma explain the drainages of lakes that are associated with climate change and the impact that has on her family and her food and her relationship with the place that she's grown up around, it suddenly becomes not a topic to study, but a crisis to help understand how you can play a role in supporting. So I think I'll end there for now.
Thanks, Marie.
Your number 7 question is organizational structures question, right? All right.
Yeah, it's about how does Indigenous-led research in Canada's North impact your lands, your biodiversity, your environment, climate change, your ice, and what outcomes does this approach have for northern communities and for the knowledge generated?
Well, a smart ice is a social enterprise which is designed so that we can build, manage, and operate the sea ice monitoring service and research in our own communities. Smart ice, we have operators. We have over 20 operators across Inuit Nunangat regions, and in each of these Inuit communities that Smart Ice operates, it has a local Inuit management committee and employs Inuit operators. Our Northern Production Center is named Nunatsevo and employs and trains Inuit youth to build our smart buoys. It's a monitoring instrument. Smart Ice just doesn't provide training for jobs. Our training also includes how to take care of ourselves. We also developing train the trainer approach. So Inuit will become more the ones to train new Inuit staff. The trainer program has been established at our Northern Production Center, where we built the smart buoys, and now we have piloting train the trainers program for satellite interpretation, mapping, and for community operations.
Mm-hmm.
Most of our work and training takes place in our community, so we don't have to travel south This allows us to maintain our connection to the land, our culture, and family. And for commercial strategies, Smart Ice does not change communities for its ice monitoring service. Instead, we work and partner with governments and industries where we share the similar values, and to fund our operations in our communities. Smart Ice's goals is to maximize its social impact by empowering communities, building capacity, and supporting Inuit self-determination in sea ice monitoring and research.
Thank you, Andrew. We have probably 15 minutes left, and I think it's time to engage our audience. So we have in the Q&A, we have 2 questions here. Great presentation. Okay, is there a question? Thank you, panelists. I am also wondering sorry about that. Great presentation, very insightful. Thank you, panelists. I'm also wondering, what are you most looking forward to as an Indigenous-led research in the North that continues to evolve and shape the Northern research landscape? So for that question, let's go to Nicole, and then we'll go to Shirley and Murray.
Thanks. I'm excited by a number of things. And actually, just before this call, I was on another call with the Gazotsiko Journal, which is a Northern-based academic journal that's in development right now, which is hoping to host Northern scholarship as it pertains and is relevant to Northern communities. But what's great about this journal is its merging of Indigenous and Western ways of knowing, platforming not only regular styles of scholarship and research, but also stories, poems, artwork, things that represent better our communities. So, you know, these types of initiatives are finally starting to pop up and be mobilized because of new access to funding through some of the mechanisms that didn't used to exist before, but are now starting to exist. I'm also hopeful and pushing, and fingers crossed we'll see this, because I think it was sort of a thread that was discussed with many of the participants, is this issue of our geographic location in relation to training opportunities. And one of the programs that I've been involved with in the US is developing and launching the first Indigenous Health PhD program. And this is US based. And I would love to see something that is reflective in the Canadian landscape. And I think the Northern context is so incredibly deep, rich, and important for this initiative that I would love to see one of the up and coming Northern institutions prioritizing some of this type of work that bridges all of these different dialogues and conversations that we're having today. Because as we know, health and well-being and how we frame our program within the American context is very diverse, is very vast in terms of its spread of disciplines, but also allows our students to remain within their communities around the United States. And we facilitate connections for those that don't have stable internet to be able to access coursework and classes, even though, again, they're staying within their communities. So I think, you know, we see examples of these in other countries, and I think there's programs we can look to now to help deal with the issue that Andrew was talking about, which, you know, means we have to take students from their communities. And I don't think that this needs to be done. There's enough programs out there that have facilitated graduate level programs where students can stay in their communities and advance their education. We just have to have initiative and push from institutions to start prioritizing these types of initiatives. So I'm hopeful and excited that we'll see more of that expansion coming within the Northern landscape, in addition to, of course, some of the ways we can share our knowledge and work through Northern-based journals and things to such extent. Thank you.
Thank you. Shirley?
Yeah, and thank you. Hi, Sharon. Thank you for the question. I think that what we're really excited about is that we're at a place now where we're finally able to do our own work. We're able to seek the solutions to issues that are raised from within our community on our own terms, using our own methodologies, building knowledge that we know will result in improvements, and we can access the funding and do it for ourselves. That's something that, you know, has been not possible in the past. We've been really limited by a lot of structures that didn't fit with the way we do research. And increasingly, this whole field of research is opening up so that funders are interested in coming to allow us, to enable us to work on our projects in our own ways. So that's really exciting and a big change that I see, you know, is going to contribute to really improved research context in our northern communities.
Thank you, Shirley. Quickly, Murray, and then we'll go to the next question.
Just in a really general sense, I think my optimism over the opportunity for Western knowledge is to combine well with Indigenous-led research and research by the North for the North is, as we get to know each other better, as trust builds, the opportunity builds and grows. Just that the richness, you know, we spend so much time just trying to understand each other sometimes, or just getting to know each other, or developing trust, or developing initial ways of working well together. Those build and they grow just like any relationship over time. And there's so much more opportunity as people know each other better, understand each other more, and respect each other more. So I'm just very excited for where all that knowing and sharing can go in the future.
Yes, thank you. And so if there's like research entities that hold dollars for Indigenous-led research, it should be open and collaboratively working together to be able to access funding for Indigenous-led research in any communities, whether we're Inuit or Indigenous, you know. So yeah. The next question is, thank you so much for the great panel and perspectives. I have a question for all panelists. What else can What else can academic researchers do to do better to engage and incorporate Indigenous knowledge in research processes? So it's for all the panel members. So Cookie.
So one of the things that we're really trying to promote at Akimavik is that researchers really engage in an equal kind of partnership with us. When you come into our community, we expect you to take training in Inuit Kayumak ways of knowing. And we also expect you to contribute to building our own capacity as a research team. So, you know, a lot of researchers who come to our communities deliver workshops for youth in, you know, necropsy or ways of doing tissue sampling, those kinds of things. So we want to make sure that there's a balance. We're going to share our knowledge with you, and you share your knowledge with us, so that we can build together. And I think, you know, that as Murray just talked about, that importance of relationship, it's completely critical. Everything is grounded in relationship, is what our elders tell us. So that research relationship cannot be overlooked. It's really critical to develop that in as many ways as we can.
Okay, Nicole?
And something here that I think it's been becoming a more prominent sort of, and I'm going to call it loosely an issue. Most of my scholarship work is at the international level around planetary health, which includes sort of this element of climate change and well-being and interconnectivity between all aspects of living beings on the planet. And one of the things that has become very apparent with the increasing crisis of climate change and biodiversity loss and pollution is the increasing acknowledgement that we've heard of traditional knowledges from around the globe. One of the issues that I found is that the conversation around incorporating knowledges often forgets about the indigenous peoples that hold that knowledge. So the dialogue is more about the knowledges than about the people. And, you know, I highlight that because when anybody asks me questions about incorporating indigenous knowledges, I'll always reflect back to say, well, actually, it's about incorporating and involving and partnering with indigenous peoples, because, you know, that's an extension of and root that back. And this is happening more and more. And I know it's going to become more of an issue as there's greater respect for our knowledges, which is great. But we can't forget the peoples in that process. And we can't forget, of course, the needs and elements of sovereignty and free informed prior consent with FPIC and the United Nations Declaration, you know, of Indigenous peoples and all of these elements that come into that. What does co-benefit sharing mean in the context of knowledge, as Shirley was describing? And how is co-benefits defined? Who owns the data? You know, is there data sovereignty involved as a part of that process of conversation? Whose intellectual property is the knowledges that are shared from communities? So these are complex questions that often aren't and do not get asked within this increasing acknowledgement of traditional knowledges, which is great, but you know, we have to be mindful of some of these considerations and always first and foremost premise peoples before the knowledges, because it does not come without them. Thank you.
Thank you, Murray.
Just, something that hasn't been mentioned as much that I think I'd like to highlight is just the importance, the opportunity for academic researchers to recognize, incorporate, acknowledge, elevate the role of local organizations and local expertise in the research. Sometimes, sure, local expertise, an elder or a traditional knowledge holder, that's recognized, that's approached, that's prioritized. But what about the local hunting, fishing, trapping organization? What about the local organizations like Shirley and Kukik lead? There's so much capacity, so much research expertise already within the community. Engage, elevate, support, connect with, complement, think of how your work and your expertise and your interests can work well with those organizations. And you know, we're researchers. We should be able to find stuff, including understand the community before we get there a little bit. Who's worked there? What have people done? What are some of the past successes and failures of research in the community? And just understand the context, the broader knowledge system that you're coming into, and you know, work well with people that have experience in that system. Don't start from scratch.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Murray. Andrew.
Well, I would like to see more Inuit-led projects and possibly have maybe a university in the north. So you don't have to travel south to get your education or training. That's one of the things I would love to see up here in the north.
Mm-hmm. And the university in the north by the north.
Yes.
It's the other one. Yeah. There's another question here in the questions. It says, what can teachers do to support youth in building Indigenous research practices while they're in a westernized curriculum? Well, just anyone who wants to answer that.
When we formed Nunavut, you know, this was our mandate. how do we redesign an education system around Indigenous knowledge, around Inuit Kayumayaktukangit. And I was doing a community consultation across the North, talking to educators and administrators. And one of the administrators said, well, we've got to blow up the schools. And I think that, you know, that really set us in the direction of how we tried to make sure when we designed what became the Made in Nunavut curriculum, which actually has never been implemented in Nunavut schools, was designed around lived experiences. How Inuit have always built knowledge through their lived experiences, you know, on the land, in the communities, in relationship, you know, through building knowledge collaboratively. And I think that it's a huge challenge. The reason Ujiswinakayang Hunters is so successful is very little of it takes place in a classroom. It takes place through that lived experience. And kids actually apply, you know, as Kukik described, they're building knowledge by observing what they're seeing, and then applying that knowledge to in ways that they can seek solutions to improve or make it better or build understanding. And that typically doesn't happen when you're limited to reading the chapter and answering the 22 questions at the end of the textbook. You know, we have got to change the way we're educating. And there is a pedagogy, you know, an Inuit pedagogy called Inuinup that lays out very clearly how we do that, how we should be engaging in that teaching and learning relationship that is grounded in this lived experience. So we educators have got to get out of our classrooms and begin to think more about the real process of teaching and learning and engaging that builds knowledge from, you know, from that kind of perspective. I'll just share very quickly, one of my big aha experiences as a teacher was my first year teaching. I said to my classroom assistant, I know they know the answers to these questions, but why are they not answering? They won't put up their hands, they won't answer the question. And my classroom assistant said, but surely they know that you know the answer. So why are you asking the question? If you have knowledge, it should be shared. If we don't have an answer, we collaborate and seek the answers together. That completely changed the whole way I taught from that moment on. But I think it's something we always have to keep top of mind. How is it that we're engaging in seeking knowledge and building understanding? And if we have the information, it's to be shared. And then we're to collaborate on seeking the answers that, you know, to questions we don't have the information about. How do we do that in our education system today? That'll make all the difference.
Well, this is awesome to close this panel. I was told a few minutes ago we had 3 minutes left, and it's now 4 o'clock. So I want to take this opportunity for thanking the panelists. What an incredible panelists we had today. And I want to thank all the audience that joined us, and thank you for your questions, and hope we can go on and have this very important discussion on Indigenous knowledge, working together in collaboration with others as well in science. So thank you so much. Thank you to the CSPC as well for allowing us here today. So take good care, you guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Norma, for hosting us.
You're welcome.